At 74, I had developed the kind of sleep that comes in fragments. 2 hours here, 40 minutes there, then long stretches of darkness where the refrigerator hummed downstairs and the pipes ticked behind the walls like an old man clearing his throat. The house was too large for one person now. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a heated sunroom my wife Lorraine had adored during winters, and silence in every corner thick enough to hear yourself aging inside it. I woke at 5:12 that morning because someone had dropped a spoon in the kitchen. Metal against tile. Sharp. Careless. For a moment, I forgot Lorraine was dead. That's the worst thing grief does to you after 50 years of marriage. It gives you tiny refunds of hope before taking them back with interest. I sat up slowly in bed, knees aching beneath the blanket. Outside the windows, November rain crawled down the glass in crooked silver lines. The thermostat read 67 degrees. Lorraine always liked 72. Too cold builds character, I muttered to the empty room. No one laughed anymore when I said things like that. I pulled on my robe and stepped into the hallway. The upstairs still smelled faintly of cedar polish and the lavender sachets Lorraine tucked into drawers 15 years ago. Downstairs, voices drifted from the kitchen. Daniel and Brooke. My son had his own key. Of course, he did. I'd paid for the house. He lived in 20 minutes away. And somehow he still spent more time in mine. I paused halfway down the staircase. You need to stop dancing around it, Brooke whispered. I know. Daniel sounded tired already. It wasn't even 6 in the morning. He's 74, Daniel, not 40. A coffee machine hissed. Then cabinet doors opened and closed. I stood there quietly in my robe, one hand on the banister polished smooth by decades of family life. He can barely manage this place himself anymore, Brooke continued. $3 million sitting in property and accounts while he heats 6 empty bedrooms. 3 million. Interesting. Not Dad. Not Harold. Not even your father. Just numbers. Daniel sighed heavily. You think I don't know that? You said the attorney already drafted the transfer paperwork. My fingers tightened on the railing. Transfer paperwork. Rain tapped harder against the windows. He just needs to sign the revised estate packet, Daniel said quietly. That's all. Like I was a delayed shipment, a package waiting for release. I should have walked into the kitchen immediately. I should have embarrassed them both right there beside the marble island I paid $42,000 to install in 2018 because Brooke wanted something brighter. Instead, I stayed still. Age teaches you something useful about betrayal. The first instinct is anger. The second is humiliation. But if you survive long enough, eventually comes the third thing, observation. I stepped down deliberately, making enough noise for them to hear me coming. The conversation died instantly. Of course it did. By the time I entered the kitchen, Brooke was smiling with all 32 of her professionally whitened teeth. Good morning, Harold. That woman could have greeted police during a homicide investigation with the same cheerful voice. Daniel stood near the espresso machine in gray sweatpants, staring too hard at his phone. Dad, you're up early. I live here, I said. Statistically, that improves the odds. Neither laughed. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and expensive coffee beans. Brooke had brought pastries from that French bakery she liked. The one where 6 croissants somehow cost $40 because they dusted powdered sugar on top and called it artisanal. There was already a tray prepared for me. Blueberries, half a grapefruit, 1 boiled egg, dry wheat toast, old man food. I looked at it and almost smiled. 3 years ago, they used to bring bourbon when they visited. Thick steaks from Del Frisco's, lemon cheesecake. Then somewhere around my 72nd birthday, the menu quietly shifted toward longevity and soft fiber. Interesting how quickly people become nutritionists once inheritance enters the conversation. Brooke slid the tray closer. We're worried about your cholesterol. Wonderful, I said, sitting carefully. I was worried nobody was monitoring my organs anymore. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Dad, no, continue. I enjoy hearing discussions about my expiration date before sunrise. Brooke gave a tiny laugh designed to sound patient. You're being dramatic. There it was, every greedy person's favorite sentence. I peeled the eggs slowly while they exchanged one of those married looks people think old men don't notice anymore. I noticed everything. The yellow legal folder beside Daniel's laptop, the tabs sticking out from the side, blue ink signatures already placed on certain pages, prepared, Organized, hungry. You know, Daniel said carefully. Brooke and I were actually talking about simplifying things for you. You shouldn't have to manage all this alone anymore. All this, the house, the accounts, the investment properties, the lake cabin in Vermont, the municipal bonds, the Vanguard portfolio. I built Whitmore Appliance and Electric over 38 years. Started with one repair shop in Scranton in 1979 and sold the regional chain in 2016 for $11.4 million before taxes. I spent 40 years crawling through attics fixing wiring while Daniel attended private schools and summer camps. Now my own son spoke about my life's work the way hotel managers discuss luggage. Brooke poured herself oat milk into coffee. There are beautiful assisted living communities now, she said gently. Not depressing at all. There it was. Finally, the real conversation sitting naked at the breakfast table. I buttered my dry toast very carefully. With bingo nights? I asked. Daniel exhaled hard. Dad, come on. No, I'm curious. Do they still force old people to do watercolor classes against their will? Brooke's smile tightened. You joke about everything. It's cheaper than therapy. Silence settled again. The rain kept falling. I looked around my kitchen. The copper pans Lorraine insisted we didn't need. The sub-zero refrigerator humming softly. The little crack in the ceiling crown molding I never got around to fixing after the 2021 storm. A whole life inside these walls. And sitting across from me were two people already measuring where to place the furniture after I was gone. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not loudly. No thunder. No cinematic heartbreak. Just a quiet internal click, like a deadbolt turning. Because I suddenly understood something very clearly. They were no longer waiting for me to die. They were waiting for me to cooperate. 3 days later, Daniel arrived with soup. That alone should have warned me. My son had never voluntarily carried soup into my house in his entire adult life unless there was paperwork nearby. It was tomato basil from that overpriced organic market near his subdivision. $12 a container. The kind of place where apples sat under little chalkboard signs, explaining their emotional journey from orchard to shelf. Outside, wet snow dragged itself across the driveway in gray slush. November was dying slowly. Daniel set the soup on the kitchen counter and shook snow from his coat. You should really hire someone for the driveway, he said. It's dangerous. I've survived electrical fires and 2 recessions, I replied. I think I can fight frozen water another season. He smiled weakly, not because it was funny, because he wanted something. I ladled soup into bowls while he hovered near the island, pretending to scroll through emails. His loafers were too expensive for weather like this. Brown Italian leather. $800 minimum. I knew because I bought his first pair. Funny thing about sacrifice. It trains your eye to recognize the exact shape of ingratitude. We sat down in the breakfast nook cornered every winter because the morning light hit the windows softly there. Her orchid was still sitting beside the sink, long dead in its ceramic pot. I hadn't thrown it away yet. Daniel blew on his soup carefully. You keeping busy? I alphabetized the screws in the garage yesterday. Living dangerously. Another thin smile. Then he reached into his briefcase. There it was. The sound. Paper against leather. Always paper now. Dad actually brought something by for you to look over. Of course you did. It's nothing serious. Those are the exact words people use before serious things happen. He slid a neat stack of documents across the table. Blue tabs marked different pages. Signature lines flagged with yellow stickers. Power of attorney authorization. Medical directive update. Joint account access amendment. I read each title slowly. Daniel kept talking in that soft, reasonable tone people use with elderly relatives and hostage negotiators. It's just precautionary stuff, in case something happens. Something always happens eventually, I said. You know what I mean? I did. What he meant was stroke, fall, confusion, memory loss, dependency. What he meant was ownership with better manners. You already have emergency contact authority, I said quietly. This just streamlines things. There's a special kind of greed that dresses itself as efficiency. Brooke had mastered it beautifully. I turned another page. There it was again. The phrase, Asset Management Authority. Interesting wording. Not help, not support. Management. like I was becoming inventory. Daniel leaned forward. You don't have to read every page right now. That sentence almost made me laugh. A man doesn't spend 40 years negotiating appliance contracts without learning one sacred rule. Always read the page people want you to skip. I adjusted my glasses. Outside, a snowplow groaned somewhere down the street. You remember 2009? I asked suddenly. Daniel blinked. What? The restaurant. His shoulders tightened immediately. Good. He remembered too. In 2009, my son had decided he was going to open a steakhouse with two college friends who wore cufflinks and used words like concept dining. I gave him $180,000. Not loaned. Gave. By year 2, the IRS was circling. One partner disappeared to Arizona with payroll money, and Daniel stood in my driveway at midnight crying hard enough to fog the windows of his BMW. Dad, please. If this collapses, we lose everything. Everything. Meaning his condo and reputation. I wired $247,000 the next morning to keep creditors from tearing him apart publicly. Lorraine cried that night in our bedroom. You keep saving him from consequences, she whispered. He's my son. No, she said quietly. He's becoming your addiction. I never forgot that sentence. Daniel shifted in his chair now. That was different. Was it? You wanted to help me. I did help you. I looked down at the papers again. And now you're helping yourself. His jaw hardened slightly. That softness people wear around old relatives is fragile. Scratch it once and resentment shows underneath almost immediately. You make it sound ugly. Usually because it is. Silence. The heater clicked on overhead. I remembered another number suddenly. $94,000. That was the tuition bill for Ellie and Mason's private school over 4 years after Daniel insisted the public district was academically limiting. Another. $62,400. Their mortgage arrears during COVID. Another. $31,000 for Brooke's temporary legal expenses after she sued her former business partner. Every financial emergency in their lives eventually arrived at my doorstep wearing expensive shoes. And every time I paid, not because they deserved it, because Laura nerved to squeeze my hand beneath the table and whisper, they're still our family. Funny thing is, dead people stop voting eventually. Daniel pushed the papers slightly closer. Dad, nobody's trying to take anything from you. I looked directly at him. That made him uncomfortable immediately. People who lie prefer movement. Eye contact traps them. When your mother's dying, I said softly, she made me promise something. His expression flickered. She said, Harold, don't spend the end of your life begging your own children for dignity. Daniel stared down at his soup. She always thought the worst of me. No, I said quietly. She noticed things before I did. The room became very still after that. I could hear the refrigerator compressor humming behind us. Finally, Daniel stood. Frustration moved through him in quick little jerks now. The briefcase snapping shut too loudly. The chair scraping too hard against hardwood floors. You're being paranoid. Old men usually are, I replied. That's how we survive long enough to become old men. He grabbed his coat. Just think about signing them. Oh, well, that part at least was true. At the front door, he paused. For a moment, he almost looked ashamed. Then it vanished. Brooke found a really nice assisted living place in Princeton, he said carefully. Indoor pool, full medical staff, private dining. I nodded slowly. Does it come with a burial plot if I sign before Christmas? Jesus Christ, Dad. There he is, I muttered. I was wondering when religion would enter the negotiation. Daniel left without another word. His Mercedes backed out through dirty snow, while I stood at the front window, holding Lorraine's dead orchid in my hands. Across the street, Mrs. Hardgrove was hanging Christmas lights alone again. Her husband died 2 winters ago. She still used the same crooked ladder. Life shrinks strangely at this age. People disappear. Rooms go silent. Children become accountants. I carried the unsigned documents into my study. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out Martin Klein's business card. Attorney at law, estate and trust litigation. Martin and I had played racquetball together in the 80s before our knees surrendered to time. I stared at the number for a long moment. Then I picked up the phone. Because if my family wanted signatures so badly, I decided they were going to get some. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. The first thing I noticed was the wine. Brooke only opened the expensive bottles when she wanted an audience. A 2018 Camus Cabernet sat breathing on the dining table beside polished glasses and linen napkins folded into little architectural shapes nobody actually understands but wealthy suburbs pretend to admire. Thanksgiving was 4 days away, yet she'd already decorated the house in aggressive Christmas. Gold ribbon on the staircase, artificial pine garlands, battery candles flickering in every corner like a tasteful electrical fire. I arrived at Daniel's house at 5:43 p.m. carrying the pecan pie Ellie requested every year. Not Brooke, not Daniel, Ellie. My 16-year-old granddaughter still hugged me with her full body instead of the polite shoulder tap modern families perform like reluctant coworkers. Grandpa, she nearly knocked the pie sideways, wrapping her arms around me. You actually made it yourself? Of course, I said. Store pies taste like scented drywall. She laughed exactly like Chlorinerta. That almost ruined me for a second. The house smelled of garlic butter, expensive candles, and tension hidden beneath politeness. Mason sat on the couch wearing headphones large enough to communicate with aircraft. Brooke appeared from the kitchen in cream-colored cashmere. Nothing says family warmth like clothing too delicate to survive soup. Harold, you look wonderful. I'm old, Brooke, not a chandelier. Her smile flickered briefly. Good. Daniel emerged, carrying appetizers, and already looked exhausted. My son had developed the permanent expression of a man financing a lifestyle slightly above his bloodstream. Dad, he said, kissing my cheek mechanically. Glad you came. Interesting phrasing. Like attendance was uncertain. I handed Ellie the pie while scanning the dining room. 6 place settings, but 7 chairs. That bothered me immediately. You expecting someone? I asked. Brooke and Daniel exchanged a glance too quickly. There's actually somebody we wanted you to meet, Brooke said brightly. Whenever people say bright things quietly, trouble is nearby. At 6:12 p.m. doorbell rang. Daniel practically inhaled before answering it. The man who entered wore a navy overcoat, polished loafers, and the kind of aggressively healthy haircut only real estate agents and local news anchors maintain after 50. Harold Whitmore, he said warmly, extending his hand. Peter Lawson, pleasure finally meeting you. Finally, that word landed hard. I shook his hand anyway. His grip was rehearsed confidence. Peter's a family friend, Brooke explained too quickly. Peter smiled. Mostly luxury properties in Mercer County. Of course. Luxury properties. Not dentist. Not accountant. A realtor. At dinner. In November rain. I suddenly lost all appetite. But I smiled pleasantly and sat down. Age gives you one tremendous advantage. Young people mistake silence for weakness. Dinner arrived in courses because Brooke watched too many cooking competitions during the pandemic and now plated mashed potatoes like museum exhibits. Salmon. Roasted asparagus. Tiny decorative carrots. No human has ever requested naturally. Peter kept admiring the wine while casually steering conversation toward property values. Subtle as a crowbar. You still in the Princeton house, Harold? 41 years. Extraordinary property. He sipped wine carefully. That neighborhood exploded in value after 2020. I've noticed the taxes enjoy exploding too. Polite laughter. Daniel avoided eye contact. Peter continued smoothly. Homes on your street are averaging between 2.4 and 3.1 million depending on renovation. There it was, the number entering the room like a third host. Brooke leaned back casually. And Dad's place has the sunroom addition. Peter nodded immediately. Oh, absolutely. Plus the original oak detailing? Buyers go crazy for that now. Buyers. Interesting category for a house I still lived in. Ellie looked uncomfortable already. Smart girl. I buttered a dinner roll slowly. You seem very familiar with my house, I said. Tiny pause. Peter recovered instantly. Daniel showed me photos. Gorgeous property. Of course he had. Probably during one of those quiet little inheritance strategy sessions, disguised as concern. Daniel cleared his throat. We were just talking generally, Dad. The room tightened. Outside, rain hammered softly against the windows while forks scraped porcelain. Then Brooke made her mistake. You have to think realistically about the future, Harold. There it was again. Realistically. The favorite word of people trying to take something politely. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. Large homes become overwhelming at your age. My age still managed to pay for this salmon. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Brooke ignored me. Maintenance alone must be exhausting. It isn't, but eventually it will be. And there it was. Not concern. Forecasting. Like discussing weather damage to an aging roof. Peter shifted uncomfortably now. Realtors enjoy greed privately. Public family dismemberment tends to sour the appetizers. Then Daniel finally spoke. We just think maybe downsizing would make sense. I looked directly at him. My life is not a storage problem. Nobody moved. Even Mason lowered his headphones slightly. Daniel rubbed his palms together nervously. Dad, nobody's attacking you. No, I said quietly. You hired a realtor before dessert. Much classier. Brooke's face hardened immediately. You always twist things. And you always decorate greed with soft lighting. Harold, she snapped. People decline quickly after 70. That's just reality. There it was. Cold. Clinical. Efficient. The room went silent enough to hear the refrigerator humming from the kitchen. Ellie stared down at her plate. Daniel whispered, Brooke? But she'd already gone too far and knew it. So naturally she doubled down. We're trying to help before something happens. False. Dementia. God forbid another hospitalization. I had pneumonia, I said flatly. Not a lobotomy. Peter reached for his wine like a man trapped inside somebody else's divorce hearing. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Brooke sighed and said, You can't expect Daniel to put his life on hold forever waiting to settle your estate. The words landed on the table like broken glass. Even Daniel froze, because some truths are ugly enough to shock the people secretly thinking them. I looked at my son, not Brooke, him. And for the first time in my life, I saw absolutely nothing of myself in his face. Only appetite, 40 years of work, millions earned, sacrifices made, and somehow I had raised a man impatient for probate. Ellie stood abruptly. I'm not hungry anymore. She left the table quickly, eyes wet. Nobody stopped her. I folded my napkin carefully beside my untouched dessert. Then I stood, slowly. My knees cracked loudly in the silence. You know what Lorrainians told me? I asked. Nobody answered. She said money doesn't corrupt families. I picked up my coat. It simply introduces them. Daniel finally looked ashamed. Brooke looked irritated. Peter looked desperate to leave, without losing future commissions. And me? I suddenly felt very calm. The dangerous kind. At the front door, Daniel followed me out into the cold rain. Dad, wait. I turned. Water dripped from the porch gutters between us. She didn't mean it like that. Yes, I said quietly. She did. Please don't overreact. Overreact. Another wonderful word people use after stabbing you politely. I stepped closer. Tell me something honestly, Daniel. His face tightened. When exactly did you start discussing my house like I was already buried inside it? He had no answer. That was answer enough. I drove home through rain and darkness with Lorraine's old jazz station playing softly through the speakers. At 8:47 p.m., I parked in my empty driveway. At 9:03 p.m., I poured myself 2 fingers of Macallan 18-year scotch. And at exactly 9:16 p.m., I called Martin Klein back and told him to rewrite everything. Martin Klein still kept paper files. That was the first reassuring thing I noticed when I entered his office the following Tuesday. Not tablets, not floating digital signatures, not 23-year-old assistants calling everyone you guys. Paper. Heavy filing cabinets lined the walls beside framed law degrees yellowed softly with age. The office smelled like coffee dust and old carpet cleaner. The scent of men who survived careers before branding consultants taught professionals to decorate themselves like boutique hotels. Martin looked older than I remembered. Then again, so did I. Harold, he said quietly, gripping my shoulder. You look terrible. That's fortunate, I replied. I'm paying enough taxes to qualify for deterioration. He laughed once through his nose and motioned me into the chair across from his desk. Rain streaked the windows behind him. November seemed determined to drown New Jersey before Christmas. So, Martin said, opening a yellow legal pad, tell me what happened. I told him everything. The breakfast conversations, the paperwork, the realtor at dinner, Brooke discussing my estate like a delayed shipment, Martin listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in neat block letters. When I finished, he leaned back heavily. I warned you 15 years ago not to make Daniel beneficiary on so many transitional accounts. I know. You kept rescuing him. I know. He studied me for a moment. Do you think they tried to declare incompetence? That question sat in the room like smoke. I answered honestly, yes. Martin nodded immediately, unsurprised. Then we moved quickly. There's something deeply sobering about hearing your remaining life discussed like a corporate restructuring plan. He pulled several folders from a cabinet. Current estate valuation? Roughly $8.2 million, depending on markets. Martin whistled softly. The numbers still startled people. Not me. I remembered every burned transformer, every 14-hour shift, every motel room during expansion years in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Money looks abstract to children who inherit it. To the people who earned it, money has fingerprints. Martin adjusted his glasses. Assets currently exposed to Daniel? Too many. The Princeton house. Investment accounts. 3 commercial properties still generating lease income. The Vermont cabin. Municipal bonds. Liquid cash reserves. Years ago, I structured things loosely because family felt safer than paperwork. That was my mistake. Martin slid documents toward me. We establish an irrevocable trust immediately. I nodded. We transfer the commercial properties first, then liquid assets, and the house. We leave the residence until last. Smart. If Daniel suddenly discovered everything disappearing at once, he'd panic early. Greedy people become aggressive when future money evaporates unexpectedly. For 3 hours, we reorganized my life. Signatures, transfers, beneficiary amendments. My hand cramped halfway through. At one point, Martin looked up and asked quietly, "Who do you actually want protected?" Not rewarded. Protected. Important distinction. I thought about Ellie immediately. 16 years old. Still reading physical books. Still asking questions instead of calculating opportunities. Last spring, she came over every Saturday after my cataract surgery and read aloud from Lorraine's mystery novels because my vision blurred under bright light. Never asked for money once. Might be the only decent Whitmore left, I muttered. Martin almost smiled, then build around her. So I did. By 2:40 p.m., the structure was complete. 70% of my estate would move into an educational and charitable trust administered independently after my death. Ellie would receive protected distributions beginning at age 30. Not 21, not 25, 30. Old enough to know the price of groceries and betrayal. Daniel? A modest annual stipend tied to employment verification. Martin's idea. I laughed for nearly a full minute when he suggested it. You're evil, I told him. I do estate litigation, he replied dryly. Same industry. The Princeton house would eventually be sold after my death, with proceeds funding scholarships for trade school students. That decision felt especially satisfying. Daniel spent years mocking electricians and repair workers despite being raised entirely on electrician money. Life enjoys symmetry. When I finally left Martin's office, darkness had already settled over town. I drove home through sleet feeling strangely lighter. Not happier, just clearer. At 74, clarity is underrated. The next several weeks became theater. Daniel kept visiting with increasing frequency. Too frequent, like a man checking whether a safe remained locked. He brought groceries I never requested. Asked odd questions about account passwords. Mentioned future planning every 12 minutes. Brooke became even worse. Suddenly, she cared deeply about my medication schedule. Did you take your blood pressure pills? Should you really be driving in this weather? Maybe we should organize your financial records together. Together. That word started sounding radioactive. I played my role carefully, confused enough to relax them, sharp enough to protect myself. One afternoon, Brooke stood in my kitchen pretending to help organize mail while casually opening a drawer she had no business touching. I watched from the hallway silently. There's something chilling about seeing another person search your home while smiling at you over dinner every Sunday. She looked disappointed, finding nothing useful. Good. By December, Daniel's spending became noticeably more reckless. That interested me enormously. New Range Rover, kitchen renovation, Mason suddenly accepted into a prep academy costing $40,000 annually. One evening I overheard Brooke on speakerphone discussing expanding the Princeton property after transition. After transition. Like I was a presidency. The truth hit me slowly then. They had already financially committed to inheriting me. Probably loans, credit lines, projected assets. My death or dependency had entered their household budgeting. I sat alone that night in Lorraine's old reading chair with a glass of bourbon turning warm in my hand. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the corner. I decorated it myself for the first time since she died. Crooked lights, too much tinsel, one ornament upside down for 3 days before I noticed. Grief lowers your standards in strange ways. On the television, some financial analyst talked about market corrections while fake snow drifted across luxury car commercials. I kept thinking about Daniel at 8 years old sitting cross-legged beside this exact fireplace building Lego towers while Lorraine baked cinnamon cookies in the kitchen. Back then he used to look at me like I could solve anything. Maybe that was the beginning of the problem. I solved too much. At 10:14 p.m. my phone buzzed. Ellen. Grandpa? Her voice sounded hesitant. Everything all right? Long pause. Then, quietly, Dad and Mom think you don't notice things. I stared at the Christmas lights. No. They talk about the house a lot. Of course they did. She inhaled shakily. I heard Mom say the estate lawyer should have been handled before Thanksgiving. Handled. Interesting choice of word. What else did she say? Another silence. Then, she said old people get stubborn right before they lose independence. I closed my eyes. Lorraine would have hated this. Not the money, the ugliness, the stripping of humanity from someone before they were even gone. Grandpa, I'm here. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't want you thinking everybody's waiting for you to die. That nearly broke me, because she said it like a child apologizing for adults. I swallowed hard. Well, I said quietly, one person isn't. Outside, snow began falling softly across the dark lawn, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up angry. Thanksgiving arrived gray and wet, the kind of cold November day where the sky looks exhausted by none. I woke at 6:18 a.m. to the sound of wind scraping branches against the bedroom windows. Lorraine used to love Thanksgiving. She believed feeding people fix things. Poor woman. Biden o'clock the house smelled like sage stuffing and turkey because I still cooked out of habit, even though dinner was at Daniel's. Reflex survives love long after hope dies. I stood alone in my kitchen basting a 14-pound turkey nobody would eat while Sinatra played softly from the radio near the sink. That was when I realized something strange. I no longer felt sad. Anger had burned past sadness weeks ago. Now there was only precision. At 2:07 p.m. I arrived at Daniel's house carrying sweet potatoes and a bottle of 20-year-old Glenfiddich I had absolutely no intention of leaving behind. 3 luxury SUVs already filled the driveway. Good. An audience. Brooke opened the door, wearing emerald green silk and the expression of a woman hosting investors rather than family. Happy Thanksgiving, Harold. Still alive, I said. Thought I'd surprise everyone. Her smile twitched. Inside, the house buzzed with forced warmth. Football on television. Expensive candles. Crystal serving dishes arranged like museum exhibits. Daniel's business friends drifted around holding wine glasses and discussing mortgage rates with a passion normal people reserve for war stories. Mason barely looked up from his phone. Ellie hugged me immediately. You came. Against medical expectations. She laughed softly into my coat. That girl was the only honest sound in the room. Dinner began at precisely 4:11 p.m. because Brooke treated holidays like military operations. 22-pound turkey, 3 kinds of stuffing. Brussels sprouts with pancetta nobody under 40 genuinely enjoys. I sat midway down the table beside Ellie while rain rattled softly against the windows. At first, everything stayed civilized. Too civilized. That's how you know ambushes are coming. Daniel kept refilling my wine. Brooke kept asking if I was warm enough. One of their neighbors, a dentist named Alan with terrifyingly white teeth, asked whether I'd considered senior communities. Interesting coincidence. Then, halfway through dessert, Daniel tapped his fork lightly against his glass. Tiny chime. Conversation stopped. There it was. The ceremony. My son stood slowly, smoothing a sweater like a politician preparing bad news. Before everyone leaves, he began carefully. Brooke and I wanted to talk about something important regarding Dad. The room tightened immediately. Even strangers recognized the smell of inheritance. Daniel clasped his hands together. We've been increasingly concerned about his safety living alone. Public concern. A wonderful disguise for private greed. I continued eating pie. Pumpkin. Too much cinnamon. Lorraine's recipe was better. Brooke leaned forward sympathetically. Harold's had a few incidents recently. Incidents. Interesting word for aging. She nearly burned the house down, Daniel added quickly. I looked up slowly. Tiny silence. Daniel blinked. I mean you. Good, I said. For a second, I thought your mother came back to haunt the stove. A few uncomfortable laughs drifted around the table. Brooke pressed forward anyway. We all love Harold deeply, she said, performing grief beautifully. But sometimes love means making difficult decisions. There it was, the language of corporate termination wrapped in family vocabulary. Alan the dentist nodded solemnly like he'd been appointed Surgeon General of old men. Daniel took a breath. We found an excellent assisted living residence in Princeton. Ellie froze beside me. Brooke continued quickly. Private suite, medical supervision, chef-prepared meals. God forbid I season my own chicken before death, I muttered. Nobody smiled this time. Daniel's voice sharpened slightly. Dad, please. No, not Dad. Not anymore. Tonight I was liability paperwork. He reached into a folder beside his chair. Folder. Of course. Always folders now. We actually brought preliminary documents just to begin discussions. Across the table. Somebody shifted uncomfortably. Good. Let them squirm. Daniel slid papers toward me. Facility intake forms. Medical authorization releases. Property transition consultations. Property transition. There it was in black ink. Not subtle anymore. The room went strangely quiet except for silverware clinking faintly somewhere near the far end of the table. Brooke softened her voice. This isn't about taking anything from you. Every thief says that eventually. I folded my napkin carefully beside my plate. Then I looked around the table slowly, at the neighbors pretending not to stare, at Mason avoiding eye contact entirely, at Brooke sitting upright with polished confidence, at my son sweating through the collar of a sweater I once paid for. Finally I spoke. Does everybody here know my children have already spent my money? Dead silence. Daniel's face drained instantly. Dad. No, let's do honesty tonight. It's Thanksgiving. I stood slowly. My joints cracked loud enough to echo. 3 conversations in the dining room died immediately. You refinanced your house last month, didn't you, Daniel? His mouth opened slightly. You used projected inheritance assets as collateral. Brooke went pale. Interesting. I continued calmly. Kitchen renovation. Range Rover lease. Prep school expansion plans. You already budgeted my death into your lifestyle. Harold, stop this right now, Brooke hissed. No, I said quietly. You stop. The room had gone completely still. Even the football game seemed quieter somehow. Daniel rose abruptly. This is inappropriate. You brought relocation paperwork to dessert. That landed hard. Alan the dentist suddenly found his mashed potatoes fascinating. Then the doorbell rang. Perfect timing. Brooke frowned sharply. We're not expecting anyone. But I was. Daniel walked stiffly toward the foyer. 30 seconds later, he returned, looking like someone had unplugged his organs. Martin Klein stepped into the dining room, carrying a leather briefcase, darkened by rain. Good evening, he said calmly. Nobody spoke. Martin removed his coat with slow professional precision. Mr. Whitmore asked me to attend tonight. Brooke stood immediately. This is absurd. No, Martin replied evenly. This is documented. He opened the briefcase. Paper slid onto the dining table. Stamped, signed, filed. The sound alone felt surgical. Martin adjusted his glasses. As of November 18th, Mr. Whitmore's estate structure has been irrevocably modified. Daniel whispered. What? Martin continued calmly. The Princeton residence commercial holdings and liquid investment accounts have been transferred into protected trusts and charitable foundations. Brooke stared at the papers like they were written in fire. That's impossible. It's complete, Martin said. Daniel grabbed the documents violently. No, this. The assets are no longer individually inheritable in the manner you anticipated. Even Martin sounded disgusted. I sat back down slowly and took another bite of pie. Cold now. Still decent. Martin continued. Furthermore, any attempt to challenge competency will automatically trigger litigation exclusions under the estate's no contest provisions. That sentence hit Daniel like a car accident because he understood exactly what it meant. Try suing and lose everything. Brooke's composure shattered first. You manipulated him. Martin looked genuinely offended. Mrs. Whitmore, your father-in-law passed 2 independent cognitive evaluations with exceptional scores. I almost smiled. Exceptional. At 74, that felt better than cholesterol numbers. Daniel looked at me finally, not angry, panicked. Dad, why would you do this? The room waited. Rain hammered softly against the windows. And for the first time in months, I answered honestly. Because I realized you loved my estate more carefully than you loved me. The silence after Martin finished speaking was almost elegant. Not peaceful, just stunned. You could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking beneath the rain. Tick, tick, tick. Brooke recovered first. People like her usually do. Greed survives shock faster than dignity. This is elder abuse, she snapped, voice trembling with fury. You poisoned him against his own family. Martin calmly closed his briefcase. Legally speaking, Mrs. Whitmore, your father-in-law is the victim in this situation. That sentence landed beautifully. Daniel looked physically ill now. Not heartbroken, not ashamed, financially ill. There's a difference. His breathing had changed. The shallow, rapid, kind people develop when numbers stop behaving the way they expected. You transferred everything, he whispered. Not everything, I said quietly. His eyes lifted instantly. Hope. Amazing how quickly greed reanimates a person. Martin answered before I could. Mr. Whitmore established a modest annual distribution structure contingent upon continued employment and non-litigation compliance. Daniel stared blankly. Brooke understood immediately. Oh my God, she whispered. He put us on an allowance. Technically, yes. And the realization humiliated her more than losing the money itself. That was the part one enjoyed. Not because I'm cruel. Because entitlement hates dependency when the direction changes. Nobody touched dessert anymore. Alan, the dentist, muttered something about getting home early and nearly sprinted toward the coat rack with his wife behind him. One by one, the guests evaporated into the rainy night, pretending not to witness a family collapsing beside the cranberry sauce. Cowards always leave quietly. Within 15 minutes, only 5 people remained in the dining room. Me, Daniel, Brooke, Martin. Mason had disappeared upstairs entirely. Smart boy. Brooke suddenly shoved her chair backward hard enough to scrape the hardwood floor. You manipulated us for weeks. No, I replied calmly. I observed you for weeks. Her mascara had begun smudging slightly beneath her eyes now. Expensive makeup never survives greed under pressure. You made us think. Yes, I interrupted. I know exactly what I made you think. Daniel finally exploded. You blindsided us. That one almost made me laugh. Daniel, I said softly, you brought assisted living paperwork to pumpkin pie. His face flushed dark red. You were becoming impossible to manage. There it was, the truth finally stepping into daylight. Without makeup. Manage. Not love. Not support. Not protect. Manage. Like inventory. Like overhead. Ellie stood abruptly. Stop talking about Grandpa like he's furniture. Her voice cracked through the room sharp as broken glass. Nobody spoke. She looked directly at her parents, trembling with anger. You talked about his house more than you talked about him. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. Ellie, stay out of this. No. Tears stood in her eyes now. When Grandma died, he sat alone in that giant house for 2 years, and all you cared about was property values. That hit harder than anything I said all night, because children accidentally tell the truth without strategy. Brooke's expression hardened instantly. You don't understand adult finances. No, Ellie whispered. I understand what vultures look like. Then she walked upstairs. A door slammed somewhere above us. Rain hammered harder outside. Martin glanced at me carefully. I should probably go. I nodded. At the front door, he paused beside me while Daniel argued quietly with Brooke in the dining room. You did the right thing, Martin murmured. I know. You all right? I looked back, once toward the dining room, at my son standing beneath chandelier light looking less like family than a man who lost a lawsuit he expected to win. Then I answered honestly, I think I just buried someone who's still alive. Martin squeezed my shoulder once and left. The cold air following him out smelled like wet leaves in winter. I picked at my coat slowly. Daniel noticed immediately. You're leaving. I've suddenly lost my appetite. Dad, please. His voice cracked now. Can we just talk privately? Brooke scoffed bitterly. Oh, now you want privacy. I ignored her. Daniel followed me into the foyer while I buttoned my overcoat carefully. For a moment, he looked young again. Not the 50-year-old executive drowning in debt and entitlement. Just my son, the little boy who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. I made mistakes, he whispered. Yes, but you didn't have to destroy us. Destroy. Interesting word. I studied him quietly. Do you know how much money I gave you over your lifetime? He said, nothing. I calculated it last month. His eyes lowered. Between tuition mortgages, bailouts, weddings, loans, renovations, vacations, and emergencies. I paused. $3,214,000. He inhaled sharply. I continued softly, and somehow he still felt deprived. That hurt him. Good. Not because I wanted revenge, because truth should hurt when it arrives this late. Daniel leaned against the wall heavily. We thought there'd still be enough. There it was. Not apology. Arithmetic. I almost pitted him then. Almost. But I remembered Brooke discussing my decline over salmon. I remembered paperwork beside pie. I remembered hearing my own future spoken about like a delayed real estate transaction. No amount would have been enough, I said quietly. Then I left. The drive home took 26 minutes through freezing rain. When I opened my front door, silence greeted me like an old friend. No tension, no performance, no inheritance calculations hiding beneath holiday music. Just my house. I stood in the dark foyer for a long moment, listening to the heater hum softly through the vents. Then I did something strange. I laughed. Not loudly, not bitterly, just one exhausted laugh from deep inside my chest. Because after months of being treated like a dying man, I suddenly felt alive again. Over the next 6 months, everything unraveled exactly the way greed always does. Daniel had leveraged expected inheritance projections through private lending channels Martin later uncovered during litigation threats. Without anticipated asset access, refinancing collapsed almost immediately. The Range Rover disappeared first. Then the kitchen contractors filed claims. Brooke lasted until April before filing for separation. According to Ellie, the final argument involved the phrase, "You promised me security." Beautiful sentence, as if I had accidentally married her myself. By summer, Daniel moved into a luxury apartment half the size of his former kitchen. Mason transferred schools. Brooke started consulting work again. Reality returned to all of them like unpaid taxes. And me? I sold the Princeton house voluntarily the following September for $2.94 million. Not because they forced me, because I was finally free to choose. I bought a small cedar home beside a quiet lake in Vermont with a wraparound porch and terrible cell phone reception. Perfect. Most mornings now I wake before sunrise and make coffee in complete silence. No folders, no careful concern, no conversations about my decline. Just loons calling across the water and wind moving through pine trees. Ellie visits twice a month. Sometimes we sit on the porch for hours, saying almost nothing. Those are my favorite days. Last week she asked whether I regretted rewriting this state. I looked out across the lake a while before answering. Then I told her the truth. They wanted my inheritance, I said quietly. But what they really lost was the man who would have given them everything anyway. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription.